3.
Yeah, I don't like them short.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our guests, welcome staff, council. We'll reconvene this regular council meeting of Monday, June the 24th. You have an agenda in front of you. Is there any additions from staff to the agenda?
None from staff, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillors, is there any additions to the agenda? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. Under item 14, council statements, I would like to provide a council update from EDS and with regards to the food hub feasibility study. So, and I will have a motion.
Thank you. We'll put it under 14. Any other additions from council? Okay, seeing none. Is there any disclosure of interest? Councillor Flynn?
I know I'm going to get accused by Councillor Lyson on speaking on every item, but I am speaking on a disclosure of interest. Item 21.2, the applicants are clients of mine, and I will step out and I will not be here for the evening session.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Flynn. We'll record that. Any other disclosure of interest from council? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. On EDS item, I too will step out as I have a working on a short-term project with them at the moment.
Okay, so that's 14A. Thank you. Any other conflict of interest from councillors? Okay, seeing none, we'll go into our business then. Item 5.1 is confirmation of minutes to the regular council meeting of June the 10th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the regular council meeting minutes of June 10, 2019 be adopted as circulated.
Is there any omissions or additions to that to those minutes? Any questions around them? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Committee reports, we have 4 different ones today. First one, 6.1, Development Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of June 17th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to council, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting minutes of June 17, 2019 be received as information.
Any additions or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. 6.2, Community Heritage Commission meeting minutes of April 26th, 2019. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, seconded by Councillor Lindgren, that the Community Heritage Commission meeting minutes of April 26, 2019 be received as information.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond, do you wish to highlight anything there? Oh, right. It's Councillor Cannon's committee. You're behind. Any questions from council? Omissions, additions? Okay, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Item 6.3, Agriculture Advisory Committee meeting minutes of June 12, 2019. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Agricultural Advisory Committee meeting minutes of June 12, 2019 be received as information.
Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. We'll be seeing these coming before council in the next while. I just note, it was kind of interesting to me anyhow, that all 3 applications in front of us had to do with families who were transitioning to younger kids and what to do about farming areas and support as parents age. And secondly, the first 2 applications were for secondary homes that came in after the new ALC rule deadline. We'll talk about that as it comes forward, but it was very challenging discussion at the AAC, and it'll be heading our way in a bit. I'll speak more to it at the time, but we're now seeing the implications of those changes. And I do know, I think it was Councillor Lindgren and Wallace-Richmond may have been away at FCM when staff presented the new ALC thing and the differences between that and what we have existing in our bylaws and things like that. I'm hoping it was video recorded, but I really would suggest, it was a really helpful presentation that we got at the AAC, and to get up to speed, if you have the opportunity to look at that, it'd be good. But so the reality is hit home in terms of ALC applications here now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Yes, just under new business item 4, that is probably a really good summary of what I will be talking about later with regard to the food hub feasibility study. So I'm glad it's in those minutes because it makes my job easier later.
Great, thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Councillor Lavery, and thanks for highlighting those 3 applications. I see that the AAC did recommend all 3 applications, so we'll look forward to seeing those at council. All those in favor of the minutes? Carried unanimously. Item 6.4, Downtown Parking Commission meeting minutes of May the 28th. We have a motion.
Moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Downtown Parking Commission meeting minutes of May 28, 2019 be received as information.
Thank you. Councillor Eliason?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to give a quick update. We've had a meeting since this. We've been working on the downtown parking strategy plan for 2 years, just about 2 years now. And so we're nearing the end of what we consider our initial work and our initial research with the report. We're expecting to wrap up our work and send it out for a consultant to do the final plan for us. We have received some feedback from letters, and one of the recommendations of one of the first things that we want to do is change from 1 hour to 2 hour parking in the downtown core. But obviously, we're not going to make that recommendation until early on in the plan as part of the plan. With that, I need you to all remember that we need money in the budget to be either set aside into reserve or put towards the reserve this year so that we can move that along with our plan, because we don't have a capital budget for it. But we need money for the electronic enforcement, the electronic tickets as part of our capital expenditure. So it will be coming forward in our next meeting minutes, which we met last week, but the recommendation is similar to the one that DIA and the Observer article have said, which is the 1 hour on Alexander and the 2 hour in the remainder. But we need enforcement items to make sure that that is an effective parking solution for our downtown merchants and businesses and services.
Great, thank you for highlighting that for us, Councillor Eliason. Any questions around the minutes? Okay, so we'll look forward to seeing those minutes and summary of the plan at our next council meeting. Could I just ask Councillor Eliason, item 6.3, as you've had a meeting since that time, was there any update on the laneway closure plan?
That would probably be best directed to Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Okay. Director of Engineering and Public Works?
Your Worship, can you just?
That's the KFC Meridian.
Yeah, so we have not had any correspondence from the owners of the KFC or any correspondence from the business owner who was trying to negotiate or discuss it with them as well. So currently, we have met with BC Hydro, and we are staking out the location of the new transformer, which will be located roughly in the middle of the laneway.
Thank you. My question was really around the temporary loading zone, and I saw signs, City of Salmon Arm signs there.
Your Worship, that's correct. We have installed a temporary loading zone for the duration of the Hudson Revite project, because they're currently working on the east side of Ross Street to the corner of TCH, and that is expected to be done shortly here. And then I think we'll keep the loading zone in for a little while, and then we'll remove it again.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Councillor Eliason, did you want to make further comment?
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions around these minutes? All those in favor? Thank you. There's no update this week for CSRD, so we'll go to staff reports. Starting with 8.1, Director of Corporate Services 2018 Annual Report. Everyone's received the annual report. There's a proposed motion. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Eliason, second. Councillor Lindgren. Does the corporate officer wish to comment on the annual report?
Thank you, Your Worship. The City of Salmon Arm 2018 Annual Report has been compiled pursuant to Section 98 of the Community Charter. It was made available for public inspection on June 7th, And it was advertised in the June 12th and 19th editions of the Salmon Arm Observer, inviting the public to comment if they did have any questions, comments, or concerns in this regard. So at this time, I would just like to present it to council on behalf of staff. We worked diligently to bring it forward. There were many different departments involved. Finance has a large role to play and was very helpful this year, especially reformatting some of the reports and making it easier to compile the report. So,
Thank you very much. Do councillors have any questions or any comments on the annual report?
Your worship, it would be appropriate to open it up for public input.
Okay. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on the annual report? Ask a second time. Appears not. Council, do you have any comments? I would just like to comment on one section. First of all, thank you to staff. It's an extremely professional report. It has all kinds of interesting information, and it would be great for us to distribute it, I think, like through doctors' offices and dental offices and places where people just glance at things. But the page that I think is perhaps of interest to residents is page 67. I don't know if it's possible to bring that up on the screen or not. Is it possible to bring page 67 up on the screen? If not, I can speak to it anyways.
We'll try.
Okay.
After I read mine cover to cover, I put it at my office on the counter, and it's always being read.
Yep. So,
Dentist, I was gonna suggest that, but I didn't know we had the budget. Doctors' offices, most of their magazines are 10 years old.
it's okay if we can't get there. I can just speak to the page, it's fine. Okay. The title of page 67 is Average Residential Taxes. And I've had inquiries from residents who notice that their taxes have increased. And some have increased more than the 3%, that 3.2% increase that council authorized. And so people want to know why, and which is a great question. I'm glad that they take enough time to look through and ask the question. Of course, we know all about assessments, and there's a letter and informational correspondence that's directly linked to assessments. If your residential assessment went up more than average, then of course that impacts your taxes. If it went up average, it does not. But what the page 67 shows is it shows the municipal taxes broken down for protective services, transportation services, environmental services. It shows the net cost. So if I look at protective services, the net cost is about $4 million, there it is, to the city. The percentage of that tax in the city is 21%. In 2019, if you have an average assessment of about $400,000, 341 of your dollars go to protection services, which is police and fire. That compares to 2018 tax, $330, and so it shows you this year you pay $10.90 more for police and fire protection than you did last year. So it's very specific, and you go down, transportation services, $7.88, environmental services, $3.40, recreation and cultural services, $7.50, reserves, $8.48. So the municipal side of the tax increase is $50, plus we increase transportation parcel tax, which is the asphaltic overlay piece of the roads, and that all of the tax from parcel tax goes to asphaltic overlays. So we increased it $30 on each parcel. So you add 50 and 30, and if you have an average residential assessment, your taxes from the city went up $80. If we go down a little farther, in the blue section, so people say to me, well, mine went up way more than $80. I'm spending like $200 more. And here's why. It's because we collect taxes for other agencies. So you can read it the same way here. School, provincial of BC taxes. Last year you paid $764. This year you pay $775. So you pay $11.50 more. If you go down the regional hospital tax, district tax, you pay $20.70 more if you have an average assessment. So if you continue to go down that line, you can see that the increase there is $116.52. Those are not municipal taxes. Those are taxes we collect. So you add 116 to 80, and you're at $200. So it's a very useful page when talking to residents about how city taxes work and how how the municipality collects taxes for other agencies. So thank you for including that page in the report. Any other questions or comments by council? All right, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much for your work on that report. Item 8.2, Director of Engineering and Public Works, Water Use Conservation Strategy 2019, and this is for information. I'll ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works if he'd like to speak to us on it.
Your Worship, thank you. So this is an informational report. I'm just drawing attention to the current situation that we have in regards to the water levels in the lake and the ability to produce potable water for our community. So what we're doing is we're rolling out some additional education and awareness for the citizens of Salmon Arm. We are going into a bit of a drought season. If you look at the report, there was some comments made by the River Forecast Center suggesting that with the diminished snowpack, and I'm speaking on a day which we are getting rain, so this is good, and we did get some rain this weekend, but as you can see from the chart that I've got on the screen, and I provided you paper copies as well, we are below the 2015 lake levels. And this caused us some concern in 2015, because even though we have a lot of water in the lake, that doesn't mean that it's coming in the pipes to be used for potable water in the community. We have large pumps that draw the water from the lake, and these pumps also require the hydraulic pressure from the elevation of the lake to push in the water into the pipes as well. So at certain times when we have a high water usage, what happened in 2018 and other years that we've had other issues with water production, we also have the same problem with flooding. There are concerns obviously with the flooding out of the pump stations that are located at Canoe Beach. But in this case, we're asking that citizens adhere to the sprinkling restrictions, which essentially there's no irrigation or sprinkling on Mondays. And the reason we do that is so that we can play catch up into our reservoirs, because we need to fill our reservoirs during the late evening hours so that we have enough potable water to supply the different zones in the city during the daytime. And this water is not only just for potable household usage, it's also for fire protection. We need to have water in our reservoirs in case there's fires. So we are advertising, we've got public service announcements on the radio, we've gone to social media outlets as well. So, and one of the things that comes along with this is that we will be enforcing it. And there's a zero tolerance. So if we catch people sprinkling off their times, they will be communicated with. We do have a list of people that have not followed the rules in the past, so we're following up with those individuals first. And this goes on for many years, so we have quite a list. So just wanted to bring this to your attention.
Great, thank you very much. It's a very useful graph. Council, do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Flynn.
Well, I'm glad both media outlets are here, because I think we need the assistance of our citizens, and I know people don't necessarily want to be a snitch, but this is a extremely important issue. And if people are watering 5-6 days a week, they need to get reported. I did have a technical question though, because I've been asked by a few people that have automatic sprinkler systems. And our request of those is to have them run between which hours? If you could clarify for me.
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your worship, on their particular sprinkling day, they can run them from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m., or they can run them from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. So we're asking just those off hours, just not in the heat of the day, right? Because the majority of the water when you're sprinkling is evaporating if you're doing it during the hot temperatures.
So I thought I recalled that in one of our pieces for education that we actually wanted irrigation that's run by a system to be done after midnight, or?
Not necessarily, Your worship. We've asked for these particular hours again so that we can recharge our reservoirs. So we want to keep people to their sprinkling restriction times.
Okay, then that answers my question, because somebody was asking me if they're running from 11 till 2 in the morning, are they on their off day or not? But they shouldn't be doing that. They should be doing 7 to 11 morning or evening.
Yeah, and Your worship, if I could just clarify as well, I mean, obviously the times are one thing, but if they haven't already irrigated from 7 to 11, then it's probably okay if they irrigate late at night as well, but only for a few hours. Your lawn doesn't need much water. Yeah. And I think that's where people, there's a misconception of how much water your lawn actually needs to be thriving.
Is there a specific number to contact to report people that aren't following the days?
They can contact City Hall, they can contact the bylaw department, because obviously the bylaw department will be going out and informing and educating, and also unfortunately ticketing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other comments or questions from council? Okay, thank you for bringing this forward to us, and we know that Monday is a day that no one should be irrigating, and so that's an easy one to pick out. I think this graph is really interesting when you look at 2018 lake level, 2019 lake level. The difference is about 5 vertical feet across the whole expanse of the lake. So that is a lot of water difference. And the telltale sign for me is the Sabinus Bird Trail. We've been able to run the Sabinus Bird Trail all year, all through May and June, and usually there's 2 or 3 weeks where it's flooded. So the water is far lower than certainly it was last year. So thank you very much for that, and we will get that word out to our residents. Okay, we'll move on to item 8.3, Director of Development Services, Public Art Proposal, Lakeshore Drive and Alexander Avenue Northeast. We will have a proposed motion on the screen in just a minute. Is there a mover and a seconder for that motion? Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Lavery, thank you. Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, I can speak to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Go ahead, Director of Development Services. I read it wrong.
So from last Monday's Planning and Development Committee meeting, where Mr. Laird presented this proposal for a public art feature on the downtown Askew's site, which is actually City Boulevard. There's been traditionally a large sign, commercial sign on the 2 pillars shown on this drawing, and that sign was put in place in 2002, and there was a sign variance approved for that way back when. I remember doing the report on that. And Mr. Laird would like to, with the support of Downtown Salmon Arm and a number of other community organizations, post this public art feature of a treble clef and a note pattern which reads "O Canada." And the height of the structure is approximately 45 feet above the grade, and the width from here to here is about 30 feet. It would be powder-coated aluminum, and it has been designed by a professional artist. And Mr. Laird is here One thing the report that I wrote on June 18th doesn't say, which Mr. Laird did bring up in his presentation, is that he would maintain the sign, and thanks Aaron for reminding me, he would maintain the sign for 10 years, after which time it hasn't been determined who would maintain it.
Okay, thank you very much. I see Mr. Laird's in the gallery. Did you want to add anything, Bill? Come forward.
Thank you. There isn't too much to add. The only reason I put 10 years there is, you know, the odometer is moving on, so we don't know what's going to happen. Check the back of your birth certificate. There's no guarantees, is the saying.
Bill, would you just pull that mic up just a little bit? Thank you.
Last week I had a rudimentary model. This week I have a 3D printout. So this is what the sculpture will look like. That's straight on Alexander. And if you're walking east past Askew's, that's what it would look like. So it is, as I tried to describe last time, it is calligraphy, if you will. So our biggest challenge is making sure the footings are right and that the steel structure is correct, which all indications are that we're going to be able to achieve that. So hopefully the recommendation will be supported, and if anyone has any questions, I'll answer them. Isn't technology amazing? Like, this was printed here in town from the drawings that we have made to produce the sculpture. And as I just said to our director of planning, I can remember when I used to get in trouble for considering a long-distance phone call. So it's interesting where we're going technology-wise.
Thank you. Can I just open it up to questions? Councillor Flynn.
Just a quick question based on that compared to what we have on our screen. Is it going to be, is the note, the treble clef, going to be red or?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, this is, of course, just the gray plastic.
Oh, so you didn't get to painting that
No, we
yet?
haven't attempted that, and
Okay.
hopefully I'll have this
Okay.
up fairly soon.
I think this is a wonderful idea, and the fact that it's O Canada and really creative and supports our music and arts and culture, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lindgren.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for coming and showing us the printout. Is great. I've been following some social media posts about this possibility. Word got out, and people had questions about night illumination. That was one of the questions. Will it be lit up at night?
In the drawing, it's difficult to see, but at the very bottom of the treble clef, there is a roof on the drawing. It's right at the soffit line. You can barely see it there, and there will be a light in each corner of that. So on the Alexander Street side, there will be 2 spotlights that run up the face.
Okay. And the other question people had was, will it be centered to Alexander? And I think I remember you saying something about this last week.
I do not know why, when the CPR built that building and digging up the footing, we were able to establish that it was poured in '64 based on the electrical wiring. So we do not know why it's not centered, and I won't be moving the columns, although
Okay.
that's a very good point.
Okay. And I guess the only downside that people seem to, like the only negative I heard online was about the size. Is there any appetite to make it smaller? Or is this a...
It could be made smaller, but I'm not sure why we would do that.
Okay.
I'm interested in trying to build the biggest and get us in the Guinness Book of Records.
I understand that. I'm just asking the questions that I saw online, so.
Absolutely fair.
Okay.
There was Warren Welter, who originated the idea, would have liked to have seen it at grade level so that people have their pictures taken in front of it.
Yeah,
But it doesn't leave room for protection for the piano.
right.
And our dream was to try and get it up high enough that it would be seen from various points at the highway. You wouldn't have to just look straight down Alexander to see it.
Yeah.
So it is a huge statement. So I appreciate those questions.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Also delighted to approve a private public art project, which is an important thing and a brave thing, and I'm sure you have many things to do in your life, so I appreciate you taking the time to do it and do it as properly as you have. I just wanted to pass that there is a a movement called Pianos in the Park, which has all kinds of ways in which you can keep a piano protected from the elements and still leave it in public.
If you have any suggestions, please email me,
I will.
because we're struggling with that part.
Okay. I'll send you an email about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Is there any other councillors who have questions or comments?
So noted.
So thanks, Bill. I commented at planning that I'm a sports guy, and but I'm delighted to see something that's other than sports in this public art to help us celebrate music and art in our community.
Sports people listen to music too.
Yes, we do. And I think big is good, because people will see it when they drive down the highway and they'll say, "What's that?" And then they'll say, "I better turn into the town and see." So thank you for bringing this to us. Any other questions, comments? Call the question, and all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on to staff report. Item 4, committee to approve public events, licensing of special events. We have a list moved by Councillor Flynn, second by Councillor Eliason. I'll ask, not sure, is it the corporate officer speaks to this? Oh, Director of Development Services, thank you.
Your Worship, I actually asked the manager of permits and licensing who wrote the report to speak to this.
It's great to have you here, Morris. Thank you very much. Would you please talk us through this report?
Sure. So Your Worship, before us, we have 3 applications that have been through the Cape Committee, and they're all repeats. They're the same 3 that we had last year. I don't think there's any real changes here. And as I said, the Cape Committee has no concerns with any of these applications.
Thank you very much. I'll see if council has any questions for you. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. No questions, support it. I one question. Who is the member at large?
We'd have to ask Marcel that. I actually don't know.
Okay. I will do that internally. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Morris. I will call the question. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you for the work of that committee. Thank you, Morris. 8.5, Director of Development Services, application OCP 4000-33, Zone 1107, Columbia Shuswap Regional District landfill and landfill expansion. We have a proposed motion. Councillor Eliason moves. Second, Councillor Lavery. Thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to walk us through this report.
Your Worship, this is an unusual report from myself regarding an OCP and zoning amendment. Normally with these type of bylaw changes, after second reading of the bylaw, the next council meeting is where there's a public hearing and consideration of third reading, which would have been today because the last council meeting, council granted second reading. There's a lot of information that is built up for this bylaw in terms of public input and correspondence, and we need some time to assemble all of that so it's done properly. And we also needed to make sure that the CSRD representative could attend and that there would be as full as possible of a council in attendance. And the best date that we can find for that is August 12th.
Thank you.
So the recommendation is that the public hearing and third reading be scheduled for August 12th, 2019.
Thank you. I'll open it up to council for any questions around the report or the date. Council, any comments? Any questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to introduction of bylaws. Item 9.1, City of Salmon Arm Cemetery Management Amendment Bylaw number 4340. It's a 2019 cemetery rates, first, second, and third reading. We have a proposed motion. Do we have a mover to that motion? Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconder. Councillor Lavery, thank you. Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. In late 2018, a cemetery price benchmarking study was completed to provide some pricing information on the city's current and future cemetery products and services in comparison to both regional and national averages. So based on the report, which has been attached for your reference, all of the city's cemetery fees are priced below the regional average. To address this, the study proposed two pricing strategies. One would enable the cemetery functions to be completely self-sustaining, proposing to increase fees by 20% per year for 6 years. However, this strategy would place the city's fees at 175% higher than the regional averages, and so therefore isn't recommended. The second option, was to increase the fees by 20% per year for 4 years, 5% per year for the next 7, and then based on inflation thereafter. This would place the city's rates on par with the projected regional averages, assuming that other municipalities increase their fees based on inflation. Under this model, the city would continue to subsidize the cemetery function. However, it would close the cost recovery gap and soften the immediate impact on users. When considering the two recommended options, we also considered that the current supply at the Mount Ida Cemetery was low, and that the new Shuswap Memorial Cemetery had a number of additional service offerings that hadn't been offered before. So this was important when we considered a third pricing strategy wherein we're seeking to increase rates by 40% this year and 40% effective January for 2020. And the new pricing for options such as the family vessels and the scattering garden, which are completely new products, those were based on market trends and the recommendations within that pricing strategy report. So what I've got included with your agenda package today is a copy of the benchmarking study, an analysis of the rates and the increases and what those numbers look like each year for a user based on the third pricing strategy of 40% over those 2 years, as well as the proposed bylaw. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the thorough report. Council, do you have any questions or comments on this report or on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, I just wanted to comment, really appreciated having the comparisons between cities because that's always very useful for all of us at the table. And it's clear when you look at those comparisons that our prices are low. So I like the plan to even out over time. So I would support the staff recommendation. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. I will support the staff recommendation, and I'm really looking forward to a similar report on airport rental fees.
I wondered how you were going to build that into cemeteries, but you did. Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, there's no reconsideration of bylaws, so we're into number 11, which is informational correspondence. Please press your button if there's items you would like to speak to. We'll start with Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Your Worship, I'd like to discuss item 7. May also be on Councillor Flynn's list as the rep. Through you to staff, is this as simple a change as it does seem in this letter?
We'll ask the Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, the RCMP can ticket under the Safe Streets Act, the Provincial Safe Streets Act, but cannot ticket under our new street solicitation bylaw. But we do have a report coming to council with a recommended fine and ticket.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond, you wish to follow up?
So then our option would be to put a hold on this until that report is presented?
Yes. Yeah, I think our direction to staff was we wanted to get the bylaw passed and then ask them for a report on ticketing within the bylaw, and we're just awaiting that now. Okay. Anyone else wish to speak to that item? Okay, Councillor Wallace Richmond, continue.
Item 8 also, possibly on Councillor Flynn's agenda as well. Again, could this letter be forwarded to the Heritage Commission? And it would also need a budget referral and quite a bit of work to figure out even what this would look like.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. I know we have budgeted for roofing on that project, on that building. Perhaps we could just ask the Chief Financial Officer or the Director of Engineering and Public Works about budget plans for the roof of the Seniors Activity Center. Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, we have $25,000 to put a new roof on the structure for this year. I believe the tender is going out shortly. We've got the documents all prepared. So, and there's still some money in the budget to do some minor work on the brick, but we're reevaluating some of that because of the extent of the damage on the side of the buildings. It is a provincial heritage building.
Okay, thank you. That doesn't answer your whole question, Councillor Wallace Richmond, so I'll let you continue.
Okay. Well, I guess my other... So is it a jurisdiction? It's not up, I mean, the city owns it, but we wouldn't be allowed to make any changes to it without provincial approval, is that right?
Your Worship, it is city-owned, and we are responsible for the majority of the major maintenance to the building, and the tenants or the leaseholders are responsible for the minor maintenance. Unfortunately, this building, being a heritage building, we can only do so much.
Yes.
But we do have a responsibility to maintain the building.
Right, okay, I understand. And also maybe Councillor Flynn could advise, but do they speak of during the spring walkabout, are they speaking of major maintenance or minor maintenance? And have they spoken to the seniors activity?
Your Worship, I can answer that. I was on the walkabout. So it's about the state of the building. A number of years ago, we had an assessment, a structural assessment done on the building. There was obviously some structural items that were flagged. One of the major ones was removing all of the vegetation, all of the vines that were growing on the front of the building. And so that had been done a couple of years ago. And so, like I say, our budgets for this building seem to be quite minimal at times. We can only do so much, but we continue to work. I think it's the aesthetics of the building that's the biggest concern.
Councillor Wallace Richmond, do you have to follow up?
Should it go to the Heritage Commission?
I think you could make a motion to move it there. I think it would be useful having their input because staff is involved in that committee.
Yes, well, I would make a motion to share it with the Heritage Commission and to continue down the path, not to stop what's happening now, but just to make sure that that committee understands this request. Okay, is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Lindgren, thank you. Councillor Cannon, who's the chair of that committee, is not here, so it's good that we have a formal motion. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the motion? All those in favor? Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Is there any other items you'd like to speak to?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Flynn, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. I was going to bring 7, 8, and 9. Item 8, just to provide some clarity. The concerns have been expressed to me numerous times with regards to downtown Revite, unsightliness of the building. Safety is a significant issue. So I think we do need to look at this a little more closely with a long-term plan as opposed to a budget item that kind of fixes a roof for now. And I mean, I'm questioning whether we're putting bad money or good money after bad or bad money after good, however you want to say that. And I think we do need a long-term plan. I do think it is incumbent on the downtown Salmon Arm to talk to the seniors. But I don't think it's really downtown Salmon's Arm's issue. I think it's our issue. And I think we need to talk about this in a bit more detail with a look to the long term. And so I appreciate this letter. It's been brought up numerous times. It's about two things, safety and look. And landlords are spending significant money downtown on downtown Revite. and this is probably one of the most least well looked after buildings. So I'd like us to think about looking at a long-term strategy, but at this point I like referring it to the Heritage Commission and hearing back from them. I will recommend a downtown seminar that they talk to the seniors, and but I do think we can't just keep going. Let's put 20,000 here, 5,000 there. I think we have to look at it long-term.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and perhaps having a downtown seminar and come and speak to the Heritage Commission might be useful communication.
Yeah, I will recommend that. And item 9.
Councillor Lyson, did you
sorry.
want to speak to that item?
Okay, sorry.
I'll go to
I will
that.
stop.
Press your button again, Councillor Flynn.
Press it again?
Yep,
Oh, I'm done with 8.
that's okay, but you want to speak to something else, right?
No, let Chad.
Okay, Councillor Lyson?
So I appreciate that we've received this letter. This is right in the heart of what their constitution and bylaws says, what the DIA is supposed to be doing. My question is, are they sending this letter to all of the buildings that could use some downtown revite? So I appreciate that we're being reminded of a building that we own, and it's, you know, it has the heritage designation from the province, which makes it especially difficult to change or renovate or modify. But and Councillor Flynn has noted that many builders and owners are doing major revites to their buildings downtown. Is this letter going out to the ones who aren't necessarily doing renovations or revites to their building? Because we're talking about the beautification of downtown. So is it just us, or have they sent this out to the 20 other buildings that need revite?
Let's just ask Councillor Flynn as the rep there. Councillor Flynn?
I would suggest that in the interest of downtown revite and in the interest of safety and in the interest of the spring walk around, they identified with staff, because not all the other landlords are on the spring walk around, that there's concerns about this building. It's too bad Mr. Laird has left, because he's one of the ones that's voiced significant concerns when you see how much money he spent right beside it on revitalizing an old building. So I have to take offense with the tone, is that I don't think they should have to send letters to every other owner of a building. I think they have a relationship with the city. They're asking us to look after our building, and I think it's a fair letter, and I think we need to look after our building. So I think it's a good letter. I support their comments, and I think we need to go through with the process. I have no problem telling them that perhaps they need to identify other buildings, but they wouldn't be identifying them to us because we don't have any ability to enforce that. So it's our building. They're asking us to look at our building.
Fair enough, and we passed a motion to pass it along to the Heritage Commission, which I think probably is the right spot. Councillor Eliason, did you want to add anything else before we go on to another item?
Yeah, I just want to ask a question.
Okay.
So my question is this are we the only people to receive a letter in the downtown that says clean up your building?
Let's ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works if he knows the answer to that question.
Your worship, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Nor does the rep on the DSA board.
Okay, maybe we can find that out. That was my only question. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn, did you have some other items you wanted to speak to? Do
Well, item 9.
you want to press your button? Okay, Councillor Flynn, you're up.
I'm just wondering what we should be doing with this. It's further support for what we are talking about. Is there any action required from this, or do we just add it to the list of people supporting this opportunity?
I'll let Councillor Wallace-Richmond speak to it because we've conversed a bit about it already, if that's okay.
Okay.
Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Flynn, it will be added to the briefing that goes to the minister. However, we wanted it on the public record so that it would be part of official correspondence, that the plea is being made publicly.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Did you want to add to that, Councillor Flynn? Okay, really appreciate this letter, and it's well worded. As you know, we've spoken about ministers that we want to talk to and ministries we want to talk to, and it seems that Councillor Wallace-Richmond would be the correct person to speak at those meetings. And so this is a further piece of information that she'll be able to share at that meeting at UBCM. So thank you to Downtown Seminar for writing it. Is there any other items people would like to speak to on the list? Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Item number 5, which is the Shuswap Watershed Council Annual Highlight Report. And I'll sort of bounce around. If we go to the last page of that report, which I think is on maybe page 11 or 12. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, right there. And scroll up a bit so we can see. So I think, again, most of us know this at this table, but it's always good to reemphasize the membership of the, on the right-hand side there. This is not solely a CSRD board. There are reps from Regional District of North Okanagan, Area F&D, I better be careful how I say that, not too quickly, Area F and Area D, from Adams Lake Band, from the mayors of Kamloops and of Chase, and our region, basically the Shuswap watershed of itself. So it meets quarterly. It starts, we're in year 3 of, and I'm the rep there, so first time, so third year of the program of essentially operations for the Shuswap Watershed Council. And I'd suggest that I was not able to make the March meeting. Mayor Harrison sat in for it. I've made the one just recently. The discussion right now is, okay, there's been 3 years of essentially study and analysis. What next? All of the data is not in yet. There's a very interesting core sample data that was taken out of Mara Lake to try to determine what is the the baseline for phosphorus loading historically in the area, and how do we look at that versus agricultural processes versus stuff that is the residue from long-standing agricultural processes that is leaching in as well. So that information, the first 2 bits have been there, but the core sampling will be out by the fall. And then again, I think the next question, and as a newbie on that, on the council, is where to proceed from there. How much more studying needs to be done, and what sort of mitigation projects could happen in the future. That is the discussion coming up, and we'll be having that next fall. If we look at a couple of the highlights, the water quality program goes up 2 pages just below the message from the chair. There's been essentially monitoring that's happened from 17 different organizations, including the city, that shares our data from a number of points, is my understanding, with the Shuswap Watershed Council. There's been partnerships with the MOE and climate change strategy to monitor the quality of the Salmon River. We'll be getting more updates in the fall on that. And again, the core sampling that'll be coming forward. There's been a bit of a shift, and I think to be focusing on zebra and quagga mussel, as all local governments are concerned about that. In May, the chair and the staff rep, Aaron Vera, presented to the House Committee on Fisheries and Oceans to try to emphasize the importance of that. We know how important that is here, but it needs to be continually rattled in Victoria as well, but certainly in Ottawa. So there's been progress there. And I'll just wrap up back to the last page of the report with the financials. You can see them there. If you have any questions, you can ask me. The key thing is the operating reserve, and there's been an operating reserve over time. We've commented it at this table over the years. It's from the previous year, it's projected it was 131,000 with a projection of 170,000 by the end of this year. It will be an ongoing topic of conversation of what to do with that reserve. The answer at this stage right now, and I actually accept it at this stage, is that this has been money put aside for essentially mitigation projects. But they haven't been determined yet, and there hasn't been a lot of take up on some voluntary stuff that's been offered. So that is the next discussion, in my view, coming into the fall. What next in terms of the direction of Shuswap Watershed Council, and how best to invest that operating reserve as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lavery, for detailing that for us. And it is, I think, the mitigation piece is the difficult piece because it's the expensive piece. Is there other items you wish to speak to? Okay. Councillor, is there any other items? I'd just like to bring up, first of all, item 4. And this is related to the page in the annual report that I spoke to earlier. 3941 20th Street Northeast is Upper Lakeshore, and these residents have an older house there on a big lot on Upper Lakeshore. And we know that there's been houses built there that are valuable, and so I'm sure that their assessment has gone up considerably. So I'm just wondering if staff would respond. I don't mind doing it myself, but probably should come from staff, just explaining the appeal process to the assessment authority, if that would be appropriate. Can I just
Yes,
check?
we can do that.
Okay, we don't need a motion for that.
No.
All right. And then item 3. I want just to speak to item 3. The request is the bottom line. Could you please contact one of our council members to arrange for a meeting regarding this issue? So I just want to make sure that staff will contact the people from Alside Place.
Yes, we will.
Great, thank you very much. And then the last item is item 12 and 13. Council, as you're aware, we've had discussions about UBCM and ministries that we want to talk with. And so I have sent out an email to you all, kind of putting that together. And so we will meet on July the 15th after our planning meeting and strategize as to who would speak to which item. So hopefully we can spread it out and everyone can have some input, and that will give everyone lots of opportunity to think and plan ahead for the UBCM the end of September. Is there any further input to that? If you have any further input to that at all, please do email me and I will include it. Any discussion on any other items? Seeing none, we'll go to item 10.2. Is there anyone wishing to speak to that item? There's a late informational correspondence item. Sorry, 11.2, my error. Yeah. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I would make, as chair of the Healthy Communities Coalition, I have done the naloxone training. It's easy to do, not nearly as scary as you might think, completely safe, and I would encourage us to support this at Canoe Beach.
Okay, would you make that motion?
Yes.
Seconder to the motion? Councillor Flynn, thank you. Do you wish to speak further to it?
No, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Lindgren?
Yeah, just a question about, this is, they want to do a presentation to teach the public how to do resuscitation using naloxone. Is that what this is about?
Councillor Wallace-Richmond, can I pass that back to you?
My understanding through Your Worship is that this is a carried who lives in Canoe who offers this training, and there are people in the neighborhood also asking if they could learn how it works. And so it is a response to teach the general public.
Okay. So, sorry, I lost my mic.
Sorry, I'll put you back on, and we can also have the corporate officer speak if we need to.
Thanks. I just want to be careful about how this is rolled out and under what context. As a former paramedic, I can tell you that it's not always completely safe to revive somebody from an opioid overdose. They often come out quite aggressive and violent. And so I'm not against training people to do it. I think that people need to be just mentally prepared for what they might see when they do revive somebody. It's good for us to know what to do and how to help, but we also need to be aware of that it actually can be quite dangerous.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. That's good information. It looks like the request is for permission to hold an informal overdose prevention knowledge meeting. So I'll just ask the corporate officer if she has anything to add to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did speak with the requester, And she indicated that she would bring in a professional whose information is identified in the body of the email. She is not the professional. And this came about because there was a number of people in Canoe who wanted the information. And so she's not planning to advertise or to charge any admission or anything. It was just a place that they could gather in order to receive the information. So I did tell her that because of the nature of the request, I would bring it to council and let her know what your decision was.
Okay. Would you like a motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. We haven't made a motion yet, have we not?
Yes, there is a motion
Okay,
on the
thank you
floor.
very much. Okay, Councillor Lindgren, do you wish to speak further to the motion? Okay,
Sorry. Is it possible to know what the qualifications of the person doing the presentation are?
If it's in the email.
The individual's information is contained in the body of the email, and I have not contacted her to find out what her formal training is. I can certainly do that. I understand that the date is coming up shortly, but if you do require further information, if council requires further information, I can certainly go back and get it.
anything further, Councillor Lindgren?
Yeah, I think I'm okay with the information that's presented here. I didn't see that originally, or I probably read it and then dismissed it. But yeah, as long as it's somebody that's well aware of what the issues are and they're qualified to teach it, I'm in favor of this.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Thank you, passes unanimously. 11.3. Anyone wish to speak to 11.3? Allison Slater, Executive Director, Silga Youth at UBCM. Councillor Flynn.
Well, I just want to say that Silga needs to be commended, and our members that are on, our council members that are on the Silga board to approve and accept for is awesome, and that means 2 of ours will get to go. So that's great news. I hope they can do it for under $2,000, and wish them luck.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Just to echo Councillor Flynn, this is great as a result of a good convention and solid financials. Thank you, Councillor Eliason. Silga has the money to accommodate 4 students, but with the caveat that anything over 2,000 would come back to respective councils to cover the difference.
Okay. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thanks, I support it. I don't have as vast an experience there as Councillor Eliason, but I haven't seen a bill under 2,000 coming through for the student reps, although I'm not particularly on top of those, but I think they've been in the order of 2,000 to 2,800 somewhere in there is my guess. So I think that I would like to just make a motion, and maybe it's a contingent motion, that council authorize up to $1,000 per Salmon Arm student out of council initiatives to do that. And I do that with a bit of trepidation, because I think that we have good representation on Silga now. I think it was $5,000 that was set aside for up to 2 students, so about 2,500. That was the sort of the benchmark of it all. But I think that we're going to need more than $2,000, and so again, I'm rambling now. I'd make a motion that we spend $2,000 out of council initiatives, up to $2,000 out of council initiatives for each of the 2 Salmon Arm students.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Eliason. Councillor Lavery, do you wish to speak further to the motion?
No.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't remember who the 2 were, but are they both Salmon Arm, or is one of them regional district?
There's 2 from Salmon Arm.
But in the past, like Gray was from the regional district. Are either of the 2 residents in the regional district?
I understand.
I guess I want to make sure they go, but I'm not willing to spend $1,000 per student. I'd be willing to go $1,000 total, and if it's $2,500 and the students have to come up with $200 or $300, they're getting a pretty good. There's some investment on their behalf, but I struggle with not knowing, I'd rather see us deal with it when we know the costs. Because if there's a way to share a room and things like that, I think that's gonna save some costs. So I totally support it in principle. I just don't know that I'm willing to spend $2,000 of council initiatives.
Thank you. Corporate Officer, do you have anything to add to the motion or the information we have?
Thank you, Your Worship. I am in the midst of speaking with Graham Gom about the students' arrangements and really trying to keep the costs in check. So I will do my very best to keep it under $2,000 because the city does upfront for the room and some money towards travel. So it will be my duty to keep it as tight as possible.
Okay, that's good information for us. Thank you.
I don't know where the students live, though.
Okay. Councillor Wallace Richmond? Anyone else wish to speak to this? Councillor Eliason?
I would make a motion to defer said motion, even though I'm very supportive, until our corporate officer has come back and told us the exact amounts of what we can expect. But I would support I don't want this to prevent them. I'd wholeheartedly support this coming from council initiative. I think it's a good thing for us to get both of them going. And I think that we can just wait till Erin tells us the exact amount, and then we can give that budget to her. But
So we would defer until July the 8th. Is there a seconder for the deferral motion? Councillor Lindgren. Don't discuss a deferral motion. All those in favor? Thank you. We'll see that on July the 8th agenda. Moving into new business. Item 12, we don't have any presentations or delegations. We're to item 14, council statements, and I know Councillor Flynn, we have you up, and Councillor Wallace Richmond, I think, was going to declare conflict on that particular item. So Councillor...
This won't take long.
Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Your
Go ahead.
Worship. At the Economic Development Society board meeting, or after the board meeting, I was contacted by our, the CAO, or whatever Lana's official title is. We have received funding for a food hub feasibility study. Part of the funding is to set up an advisory committee. They've asked for a council member, and I would like to make the motion that Councillor Lavery be nominated as our council member.
Seconded by Councillor Eliason. Thank you.
There's a tie-in to economic development, there's a tie-in to agriculture, and Councillor Lavery is our former rep at EDS, and he's the current rep at the Agricultural Advisory Committee. So I think he's a natural, and he has accepted my generous opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Eliason, or Councillor Lavery, you're comfortable with that? Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lavery. We're on to item 16, which is Councillor Lavery's notice of motion. Councillor Lavery, would you like to say anything about your notice of motion?
Not particularly, Your Worship. I think it's pretty straightforward. What is a little different is I've asked to have it presented July 22nd because I will not be at the next council meeting here. And the reason I've done that actually is just to give people a chance to think about it and to give staff some time as well. I basically want us to have a discussion on this at a time where we're not constrained by the legislative schedule ticking away that we have to approve something, and there hasn't been an opportunity for that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your notice of motion. We'll look forward to it on July the 22nd. Moving forward, unfinished business, item 17. Dan McQuarrie, letter received May 29th, 2019, Moving Forward Together initiative. And thank you, Councillor Lindgren, for taking this on. Can I turn it over to you, Councillor Lindgren, to speak towards your proposed plan?
Thanks. So I spent a couple hours with Dan, partly enjoying the wonderful music of the Black and Blues band, because they were playing that day at the senior's home where he lives, but then also working on this proposal. And Dan had some pretty lofty ideas about how we were going to sort of commandeer the meeting and show a whole video presentation, and I talked him down out of that. So this is what we've come up with together. He had his presentation already written once, and I had a hard time, we know from the last time he was here, he presents all these ideas, but he has a hard time tying them together. So asked him a lot of questions about how that should, how did those things play together? And hopefully we've put together a presentation that is logical and clear. And what we would like to see is that the resolution, sorry, lost the word, could be forwarded to for consideration at UBCM, and that if it does make it to the floor, that we get a chance to speak to it at the mic by giving this address. And I think that would be the most sort of logical way to introduce it. If somebody has other suggestions, I'm certainly open.
Thank you for your work to get it started. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I mean, Dan has been a passionate advocate for this for a long time, and I appreciate Councillor Lindgren's efforts into trying to corral this into something that would move forward. And I don't think anybody on here wants to reduce barriers at all, but I have problems with this. I don't think it's ready for submission, partly because of wordsmithing, but also I think there's some substantive aspects here. And as an example, I'll just refer to the last, therefore be it resolved, as an example. And again, this is awkward for me to speak this way, because I want to recognize the intent, both on Dan's part and on Councillor Lindgren's part, to make this work. So I last night started doing some research. I can't find anything called the Canadian Disabilities Act. It was referred to as part of an election promise by the Liberals, the federal Liberals. It's been referred to as being needing it, but there is no legal act. And I know at UBCM, things have to be very precise and prescriptive for this to move forward. I don't want to pick away at this, but to ensure something is not a role that UBCM does. I have problems with all local government buildings. I know the intent of what the wording is, but I can't support a hearing system in the water treatment plant. And I think from what I've seen at UBCM, these things get picked apart. And finally, and I call this our system, it's great here, I call it the ORS loop when I'm out there talking about people. Yeah, we got an ORS loop. I actually don't think that that's something that resonates with, I think that's the name of a corporate entity out of Vernon. I'm not sure about that, but I think it is. And so there's enough here that makes me want to, gives me pause. So I then looked at, okay, well, what does Canada have here? And I discovered the Accessible Canada Act, introduced in June 20th, 2018 by the government. Third reading, November 27th, 18. Senate passed it May 13th, 2019. And it just received royal assent last Friday. Who knew? And I think within that, and I was not doing any in-depth analysis of it, it does mention communications as a disability that should be covered under federal legislation. So I'm not sure, so again, I have some substantive parts of this, and I think it's in some ways a little premature here now too, because there's federal legislation that is on the horizon. So my sense, and I'm not even sure, do we have a motion here?
No, we don't have any
We don't have a motion. So my sense is then that that it would behoove us to do some more research to find out what indeed this new federal legislation encompasses, and to work with Dan on that. I would encourage, and I do it myself, but I would encourage anyone going forward with SILGA and UBCM motions. We have expertise here in staff with our corporate officer and our Mr. Bannister. We have Silga connections and we have Chad, and I know that the one motion that I've brought forward that I've seen to go through to UBCM to bounce off Chad, just what a gold standard motion is. I don't think, and I say this respectfully, but I do not think that this meets those tests. Work on it in the fall, bring it back to us in January, include Dan in the process, and if there is a need then to go to Silga and UBCM to proceed that way, would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lavery, and I know that that's in some ways not so easy to share, but it's good information for all of us. Councillor Eliason and then Councillor Lindgren. Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Lavery talked about it being maybe too early for us to take this on. I'm saying that this may be too late for us to take on this year. So his last comments about the timeline might be better served. UBCM would look at this and ask, is this an emerging or new item that couldn't have been addressed by you or your council before your local government area association conference? This to me is not a new or emerging item, but it's something we can work on as we go forward. They'll look at it and say, no, because we get hundreds and hundreds at the UBCM resolutions, right? And so I wouldn't say no to this altogether, because I think it's important that we recognize it, but I think that this needs to be fine-tuned into one or two whereases in very plain language with very clear intent and a very clear, therefore be it resolved, that would affect strictly local government or being addressing the federal, asking for lobbying from the federal or provincial levels. So I wouldn't, if this was a motion, I would say no to it right now, but it's a good start of where it needs to be in the new year.
Councillor Eliason, could I just ask you a question about, I don't know much about UBCM motions. So do most motions at UBCM go through the local government association, then go to UBCM? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so UBCM receives there's a deadline for SILGA, for example, which would be March 30th. So we have a time to review, vet, get UBCM's input on our resolutions, and then they go to our conference and then they're submitted. If it's a new and emerging issue that you've just found out about, that's when they're allowed to be entered into UBCM as a late or emerging issue, right? And so, for example, if it was April 15th, all of a sudden something really bad happened or something hit us out of left field, we'd be able to say, hey, Silga, we know this isn't right, but this new thing just happened to all of us and it's going to affect all of us. We didn't see it coming. We haven't had time to react. Here's our motion. Everybody's like, yeah, let's get on board. That's a great idea. We'll allow it in. But we've been dealing with Dan on the Oris Loop for 3 years now. And so I would say we've had time, if we had chosen to take this forward, to make it a UBCM resolution. So at this time, I don't know if it's quite effective. There are some very important late resolutions that come forward to UBCM that are voted on by the floor to be allowed in. I believe it's 2/3 of the room has to support the inclusion into the resolutions debate.
Okay, thank you. That's good information. Councillor Lindgren.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's good information that Councillor Eliason's bringing forward. It would have been good information at the last meeting, so that I didn't spend time working on this knowing full well it wouldn't be able to go ahead, but I do understand that that is the process. In response to Councillor Lavery's concerns, the Canadian Act is called the Canadians with Disabilities Act, so I've misquoted it in the resolution itself. It was established in October of 2015, and we also have the BC version, which is called Employment and Assistance for Persons with Disabilities Act. Neither of these acts include hearing loss as a disability, which is what Dan's issue actually is. Not that it exists or that we don't do enough, but that if it was included in the Disabilities Acts, that there would be more money spent and more focus on making sure that people with hearing loss could get the things that they need to make sure that they could participate. And we know that it's a huge cost to the healthcare system because hearing loss is one of the contributing factors to Alzheimer's. So I'm perfectly happy to take this back to Dan and let him know that we have to go through SILGA first and that we would go forward with it next year. We actually have already brought it to the current government and are hoping that they're working on it. And maybe by next year, this won't be an issue because maybe they'll move forward on it on their own. But until then, I'm happy to put it on hold.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for your perseverance, and it sounds like a realistic timeline, so appreciate that. Councillor Flynn.
No, we seem to be debating a lot with not having a motion, so I was gonna say we either put a motion on the floor or we don't debate anymore.
Okay, I think that's pretty well solved itself. Yep. Thank you. Councillor Lavery, last word.
Thanks, and I think that more information is needed, actually, is what I'm thinking of. When I did search Canadian Disabilities Act or the variants of that, I think that was an election proposal. I could be wrong, but an election proposal from the federal Liberals. It was referred to that as from advocacy groups, but looking for actual bill legislation, it didn't show up, and I think that's part of the preciseness of a UBCM thing. So I think that we need to support Dan and Councillor Lindgren in helping Dan advocate for this, without a doubt. But it's the nature of the motion, of a potential motion, that I think is concerning me the most.
Yeah, which is related to the timing, which is not really anyone's fault. It's just the way it is. So we will shoot for it at the next SILGA. And thank you for taking the leadership on there. All right, we will move onwards to other business. I do not see any. Question and answer period. I don't see any folks out there who are wanting to ask questions. Martha, do you have any questions for us today?
None that relate to council.
All right, thank you very much. So we will reconvene at 7 o'clock this evening. Thank you.
That's why I let my filthy dogs.
He's usually covered in mud from being outside.
That's so funny. We bought a new bed, and it's one of those ones that comes in a box, envy. And oh, we had it for like a week.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to council. Welcome back, staff and councillors. We're in the evening part of our meeting. We'll start with disclosure of interests. Councillor Flynn is not here because he has a conflict with item 21.2. Is there any other councillors that have conflicts with any of the items on the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none. Staff, is there any changes to the agenda?
None from staff, Your Worship.
All right, then we'll go right into our hearing component. And our first is a development variance permit application. And so I'll just read an opening statement, then we'll introduce the application. So I'd like to open up the hearing for VP 498 and VP 497. Following the reading of the motion, I will request the Director of Development Services to explain the development. I will then ask 3 times for submissions from the gallery, giving the opportunity for the applicant and public to speak. Council will also have the opportunity to ask questions. Once this is complete, I will close the hearing and council will vote on the motion. We have a proposed motion on the screen. Can I have a mover? Councillor Eliason, seconder. Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Thank you. Could I have the administrator read the motion before we go to the Director of Development Services?
Moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that VP 498 be authorized for issuance for Parcel A, Plan 295 to vary zoning bylaw 2303 as follows. Number 1, reduce the minimum building setback from the front parcel line from 6 to 2.5 meters to allow for an existing single-family dwelling on the proposed western parcel. And number 2, reduce the minimum setback from the exterior side parcel line from 6 to 4 meters to allow for a single-family dwelling on the proposed eastern parcel.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Worship. The property is owned by John Varga. It's addressed at 451 10th Avenue Southeast at the intersection with 5th Street Southeast. The property was created decades ago, and it's just large enough that if subdivided under the present zoning, R1, one additional lot could be created. You can see on the aerial photo where the existing house is located. And there's 2 setback variances proposed. One variance on the proposed western lot from the existing house is to reduce the minimum setback from 6 meters to 2.5 meters. And then on the proposed new lot, the eastern lot, this parcel line would be considered the exterior parcel line, and this parcel line would be considered the front. The minimum setback for a house is 6 meters from the exterior parcel line, and the applicant is proposing to reduce that to 4 meters in order to have a reasonable building envelope for a house.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Varga, would you like to add anything to the director's report?
No, not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Varga, first of all? Okay, it looks like none at this time. I will ask 3 times for any submissions from the gallery. I'll ask for a first time if there's any submissions from the gallery regarding this variance request. Asking a second time. Asking a third time. Council, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff before I close this hearing? Seeing none, I'll declare this variance hearing for VP 498 closed. We'll now consider the motion. Councillors, any comments or questions around the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll now look at item 21.2. We have a proposed motion on the screen. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor? Councillor Eliason. Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Thank you. I'll ask the administrator to read the motion, please.
Moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that VP 497 be authorized for issuance for Lot 1, Plan 41074 to vary subdivision and development servicing bylaw 4163 as follows. Waive the requirement to install a fire hydrant to the minimum 90-meter spacing.
Thank you. Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, this property under application is located in the Industrial Park at 4921 Auto Road Southeast, owned by Travis Johnson and Stuart Bird, who applied for a building permit earlier this year for a 2,000 square foot addition to this building here. And that addition triggered the subdivision and development servicing bylaw of the city. The industrial standard applies to this property and the surrounding area. And the standard requires a minimum 90-meter spacing of fire hydrants along roads. And this aerial photo here shows the closest hydrants in proximity to the building and the property. These yellow circles are 45-meter radius. So you can see the gap here is here on the south side of Auto Road, where a fire hydrant should be according to the bylaw. Engineering department has written a memo on this explaining why that standard exists in the bylaw, and the fire chief has reviewed this and has no concerns. and it is in front of you tonight.
Great, thank you very much. I'll ask the applicants if they would like to come forward, either Mr. Smith or Mr. Bird. Please feel welcome to come forward if there's something you'd like to add.
Hey everybody, nothing really I want to add at this time. Just want to thank everybody for reviewing this and being here, and obviously open to questions if anybody has any questions regarding this matter.
Okay, councillors, I'll open it up for questions for Mr. Johnson or Mr. Bird if you have them. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. At Planning and Development, I mentioned if your neighbor across the street had considered an upgrade prior to you, they would have had to pay for the fire hydrant. Was there any opportunity to ask them if they're looking to make any changes?
I didn't approach them. It's Hydro's land right now.
Right.
It's just it's a big empty lot. So I mean, I did not ask them if they're if they're making any changes in the near future.
Thank you.
Essentially, what we can see is they're just using it for storage.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Any other questions for the applicants? Okay, thank you. You can have a seat for a minute.
Thank you.
I'll ask for a first time if there's other people in the gallery who would like to come forward and comment on this application. Asking for a second time. Welcome to council. If you could just give us your name and residential address.
My name is Wolfgang Neudorf, address 2281 24th Avenue Northeast.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm working on a project close to the wood shop for Talius, and we kind of have the same issue as to putting in additional fire hydrants. What I would suggest is that instead of just having a blanket statement for spacing on hydrants, I think it should take more into consideration the actual need at the time. So if you look on the screen, I'm working on 5501 46th Avenue there.
Thank you.
So if you look at our spot, the one really makes no sense for us, and the other one is, yeah, okay, maybe it would be good. But I think we need to have a more common sense approach to the bylaws and to how the land is situated, and so that would be my recommendation to council.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate it. Is there any questions for Mr. Neudorf? I think not at this time, thank you. Okay. I'll ask for a third time if there's other members who would like to come forward and speak. Seeing none, we'll open it up to council if you have questions for staff or for either of the speakers before I close the hearing. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you to staff, who installs fire hydrants?
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, the city staff install the fire hydrants.
And the second question, is there any opportunity to save money by doing 3 or 4 at a time, or?
Your Worship, part of the estimate is obviously for the materials and the labor, and then there's also a 20% admin fee that's charged to that. And then typically in these types of situations, if depth of the water main is concerned, we put a 25% contingency.
Okay.
And then when the hydrant is actually installed, the applicant gets whatever's left over in that account, other than the admin fee we can't touch that. So if it's over the cost, they have to pay the total cost. If it's under, they get the remainder back.
Money back, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And some of these questions are actually follow-up questions that I've had in planning as well, but just had a little bit of time to process them a bit. So going through them through you, Your Worship, to the Director of Engineering, or maybe Development Services, but I think it's engineering. So we do not have, as we do in other situations, no latecomer provision.
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Not for a fire hydrant. If they were to oversize the main or extend the main, the water main, then they could apply for a latecomer. These are safety-related regulations.
Thanks, and I'm working my way there. Number two, does the bylaw in any way permit charging half of the, and I realize it's a latecomer type approach. I'm looking for a way here, though, to make this work. Does the bylaw in any way permit charging if that the hydro property to the south was to be developed? Can the city then charge at that point?
Your worship, no, we can't. We have had in some cases here, there's another application further down the street between two property owners, and they have agreed to share the costs.
Right.
So that was strictly between the two of them.
Right.
Typically, it's first past the post. Whoever comes in with the building permit has the obligation to do the works on their frontage.
Thank you for that. A couple more questions, Your Worship.
Yes, please continue.
If the city was to cover the costs or a portion of the costs, and I'll speak in a minute to the 90-meter gap thing, or threshold. If the city was to cover the cost of installation, where would those funds come from?
My recommendation would be that it would be capital cost. It's capital installation, and therefore would have to be budgeted for.
And do we have they wouldn't come out of reserve, or is that a possibility of coming out of reserve?
We don't have specifically reserves for this type of instance. You could take it possibly out of the water reserve, but I have to check with finance if that's legal. So it would have to be a capital installation, so capital cost budgeted in 2020.
In the budgeted year. Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. And then, so my last sort of couple of questions have to do with the underwriting insurance part of that. So I give a fair amount of weight to this 90-meter standard, partly because the area in the industrial park is in, as we're becoming a fire smarting community, is in a wildland urban interface with the potential of risk. How stringent is that 90-meter? Would a lack of 90 meters, more than 90 meters, be in if there was an incident that came through? Would that jeopardize any of our liability or insurance criteria?
I'll try and answer that, Your Worship. So essentially the fire underwriters have a guideline for the hydrant spacing in residential areas, commercial and rural areas. The 90-meter spacing is their recommendation. We follow that, so do many other communities. Having said that, there are other communities that have made a service level change, and that's either increasing the distance slightly or diminishing the distance, so actually adding more hydrants, depending on obviously what is in their industrial areas or high density. Going back to your question, would it affect anything? I think if we were to wholesale not follow our subdivision development services bylaw, and if council was not to follow the requirements of the servicing bylaw on a whole scale issue, then I believe that there might be issues for the city. In this case, the one-offs, as long as they're justified and council approves a variance, I think for the most part we try to follow the bylaw. So.
Thank you for that. I do have some comments, Your Worship, but I'll save those for a little later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks to staff.
Is there any other questions for the applicant or for staff before I close this hearing? Okay, I would give anyone in the gallery a last opportunity if they wanted to add anything. Okay, seeing none, I will close the hearing and we will consider the question. If we can have the motion on the screen, please. Okay, council, I'll open up for your discussion. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. This is a very difficult decision. you know, everybody wants fire hydrants. Of course we want fire hydrants. I also understand the need for a common sense approach. But a fire hydrant is a little bit like the life jacket under the seat of the airplane. It's very unlikely that you'll ever need it. But if you fly and you need it and it's not there, then what do? You'll wish you have bought that. You'll wish you have had the seat with the life jacket. I know the fire department is saying they can service with the existing hydrants, but hydrants often break. And I am not a fire insurance expert. And I simply am not comfortable in the role that I play, saying it's okay, you don't have to pay for the hydrant. And I know it's an extraordinary cost for a development and an improvement to your business, and I have great respect for you. I'm currently renovating my house. If they told me I had to put a fire hydrant in, I'd be in trouble. But I'd have to think about the cost of not putting the hydrant in. So with that said, and with the amount of development going on in the industrial park at the moment, I simply, it's too far outside my comfort zone to be able to say no to this. And I really do wish there were a latecomer agreement or a way to batch it all up and save money, but as things currently stand, there isn't. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to vote to defeat this motion.
Thank you, Councilor Wallace-Richmond. Councilor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Harrison. So I guess my comments here right now are in the context of all applications that we have for variances in front of us are very unique. And so I want to clearly distinguish between the application at hand and some of the applications that were referenced, possibly referenced here in the presentation. This one pushes my slightly towards the variance, but I actually am not comfortable at this stage waiving the 90-meter threshold. I do think, though, that we do have some responsibility. I'm thinking it was timing of previous bylaw and previous decisions on 4951, which is the LAD one there, that we should have seized the opportunity at that time to do something. We didn't, and it wasn't. I don't believe it was required if at that time, based on the bylaw, if my memory serves me correctly. So I think that it's incumbent to keep the 90-meter, but I think the city needs to step up a little bit in the replacement of it. So what I would like to see is that essentially the city split the costs. That's more like a plan B. And again, I want to I'll make a motion, I guess, in a second, or I'll look, Your Worship, to your advice of how to proceed. But in no way does this, in my mind, set a precedent for future applications down here. I think that the threshold is very minimal, and I think we had an opportunity a while ago, and I think we need to proceed, but I do not want to extend that, my thinking, to other potential applications. So, Your Worship, I will vote to defeat the waiver, and I'm not sure how to proceed with an idea that would say that it's a 50-50 cost split with our half coming out of the 2020 budget.
Okay. I'll ask the Chief Administrative Officer for advice on a possible amendment. If Councillor Lavery wanted to amend Section 1 and instead of say waive the requirement to install a fire hydrant to a minimum 90-meter space, say split the cost between the city and the applicant to install a hydrant. Is that possible, or should we look at this motion separately and wait?
That's possible, Your Worship, but we would have to specify where the funds are coming from.
Okay, Councillor Lavery, so either option is we can proceed with this motion and see where it goes, or if you'd like to propose an amendment, that will be fine too.
I think let's proceed with the, see how this goes, and then I would follow up with what I discussed if it doesn't pass.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eliason.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate having the motion up here, but can we have the map of the fire hydrants? and this, or maybe the ortho, right? Okay, so. Yep, any one of them will do. Perfect. So Councillor Lavery's right. We missed our chance to get somebody else to install a fire hydrant where it's supposed to be installed. And that was on the property next door. I believe it's 4951. There is a fire hydrant across the street directly. On this map here, it's the yellow one. And there's one on the corner at the Country Kitchen, I believe, or whatever it's called. And then there's one around the corner. So Councillor Lavery's right. That one was on us, and we agreed to waive that, and we agreed that the taxpayers would pay for that one. That was our decision. That was Council of the Day's decision to not require that, to make that development affordable. We also didn't. I don't think we required that the rest of 50th to be upgraded for that as well. So these guys just don't meet the requirement of the offset, right? So your revitalization or your industrial incentive for your tax relief. So I think that they're trying to build their business, grow their business. They're investing a lot of money. They don't get that capital offset, that tax exemption. So I thought that this would be a good way for us to offset that for them. The other ones, when we looked at the map of the other possible applications that are coming down, those are rather large, and those are needed, and those will fill in those gaps. But I think that we've had this chance already here at this table to get this one put in by a developer developing a new place, and we didn't take it. If we choose at this table to put that in our capital budget for this fall, if this doesn't pass, or if this does pass, we can choose to do that for the city to set that standard. But the hydro lot is vacant, and it is available there for development. And when that developer comes along with that building permit, that will come in time. So I understand what's been said, and I think we should share it. But we had the chance to get the whole amount of money. These guys wouldn't have been impacted at all, and we chose at the time to not do that. So at this time, I will support this variance, knowing that that yellow one is right across the door from them, and if that one's out, the one on the corner is right there for them, and that echoes what the fire chief has said. But on this one, I think that we missed the boat 5 or 7 years ago, so I urge council to support this one.
Thank you, Councillor Lyson. Councillor Lavery?
Nope.
Oh, you didn't, sorry?
I missed the vote.
Okay. Is there any other people wish to speak to this? Could we have Appendix 2 put up on the screen?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so first of all, really respect all of the opinions put forward by council, because I think they're all valid. There's a few things in my mind that play into this. First of all, this is what this property looks like right now. And if they did nothing, then those fire hydrants would just be there the way they are now. And if they had a fire there, the fire chief feels that he would have no troubles combating the fire with the fire hydrants in the place they are now. It's different than if that lot was empty in my mind. If that lot was empty and the developers came along and wanted to build this building, or this building plus the addition, which is actually about probably a fifth the size or a fourth the size of the building that's there already, it would be a complete different matter. But the building's already there with the fire hydrants in the spot they are now. So we don't go to developers and say, hey, those hydrants are more than 90 meters apart, you gotta put another one in there. We can only do that if they do improvements to their buildings. So I think that's one factor. For me, the second factor is we are trying to encourage young entrepreneurs in our industrial park. And I know that's one that plays in all councillors' minds. This development that they're doing is just over $200,000. It's not a large development. And so you tack on another 15,000 for a fire hydrant, and it really makes a large difference. It's almost 10% of the actual improvement they're trying to do. And I don't want that word to be out there to other potential people who are wanting to add on or improve their business, that not only is it going to cost you for your improvement, if you're not over 300,000, you're going to have to put fire hydrant in. I was looking at the big map, and there's a lot of spaces there that have larger than 90 meters. Can we just look at that one? And it's interesting because if you look at the fire hydrants there, some of the lots are not occupied. And if they built on them, they would have to put one, sometimes two fire hydrants in because of the way fire hydrants are spaced. It's not spaced uniformly out there. Others happen to be in the right spot where the fire hydrants are at the right distance, and if they had to develop, then they wouldn't have to pay. So it's a little bit haphazard in a sense, although I'm sure there's a reason why it's that way. So to me, in this instance, common sense tells me that passing this variance is the right thing to do. I certainly don't see it as a precedent for other properties because every other one's different. I'd look at those at that time. But I think in this case, I will support the variance for the reasons that I've stated. I'll leave it to council if there's any other comments they would like to make before I call the question. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
I'm waffling a bit, but can someone remind me what happened at the property next door? They were also granted a waiver or a variance?
It's a fair question. Let's ask the Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, there was a development on the property immediately to the east, and that was approximately 4 years ago, maybe 5, under the previous bylaw. And I can tell you that the way fire hydrants were measured back then, and whether it was determined or not if a fire hydrant is required, was different then than it is today. So that's one thing. But the other thing to realize too is a variance was granted to not have to do any frontage improvements. And that was approved, particularly along 50th Street, which is unconstructed right now. If they had to do that, that wouldn't have made any sense to develop what's there. It would have been too costly. And I agree with that. What's often unknown is with these servicing variances, when they come to council, is it's not always specified that a fire hydrant is needed or not. Often the variance is presented as waiving the requirements to upgrade so-and-so street to the industrial standard. We don't get into too much detail about every little thing that's required under the industrial standard. So in all likelihood, a fire hydrant was required as part of that development, likely along 50th Street here, and that was waived.
Councillor Lindgren, do you mind if you just if I press your button, and we'll just go to Councillor Wallace-Richmond. If you press again, Councillor Wallace-Richmond, if you press first, oh, let's try that again. Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Okay, Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. I do remember that variance. I don't remember ever saying no to a fire hydrant before, so that may indeed be the case where it was to waive all, right?
Right, it would be wrapped into that
Yes.
industrial standard.
But now, having come to that realization, I really don't want to punish the sin, not the sins, but the decisions of the neighbors, decisions taken on the neighbors on this development. So I'm definitely reconsidering. And it also highlights that there's a challenge here because this is one of several other conversations we're going to have. So I really don't think anybody's opposed to paying their fair share for fire hydrant. There's value in that. I just think it's the first past the post piece that is creating these problems. So by waiving or varying this one development request, you know, maybe we're putting a little bit of pressure to see if we can't come to a different way of sorting these important issues out.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Lindgren.
Thanks, Your Worship. So I've been holding my peace over here, not because I have a doubt about my decision, only because I have nothing new to add that I didn't say at the last meeting, but I just wanted to go back to the piece about how the bylaws need to work for us, and we don't work to the rule works for us. And in this particular case, I think that it's very clear, based on what you can see on the picture, but also from what we hear from the fire department, that there is adequate fire hydrant coverage here, and I don't have any qualms about approving this variance. I do look with a bit of trepidation at the map of the ones coming up and wondering how this decision will affect the next decision, but I think we have to deal with these one at a time, so I will support the variance.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Any other comments before I call a question? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Lavery opposed. Motion passes. Okay, we are on to our question and answer period. Does anyone in the gallery have a question they would like to ask council at this time? Please come forward. Could be about
Hi, Stuber. Just not a question, just a comment. Thank you guys very much for going through the process and doing what you need to do. We really appreciate the effort that you guys put into it, and also the effort that you all put into all your jobs. So, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Seeing no other questions, we have a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that the regular council meeting of June 24, 2019 be adjourned.
All those in favor? Thank you.